everybody, and welcome to today's follow-up video on the Ultimate Speed oil pump extractor that I had a look at in the previous video. Now, I was a bit downhearted that my experience wasn't quite as I had hoped, so I went out and purchased this very similar unit. It cost me £9.99 from eBay. £12.49 including postage, and it is visually different to the Ultimate Speed unit, but it's a similar size. I haven't taken it apart, but it seems to be very similar internally. I mean, if you look at the connectors and also the position of the switch and the metal pipes coming out of it, I would say that this is probably identical. As I thought, do you know what, I think this is worth a second go to see if, for me, it actually works. So it comes with a very similar setup to the Ultimate Speed unit. The documentation isn't anywhere near as thorough. That is literally just a piece of A4 double-sided. That is the limit of your instructions. However, it does come with a similar pair of rubber hoses which you attach using the supplied Jubilee clips, much in the same way as the Ultimate Speed unit. Now, the one thing which I think isn't quite as good with this is the smaller of the hoses isn't as flexible. It's a more sort of rigid plastic, sort of type rubbery plastic, and that I think will account for the results that I got from this unit. Next time I use it, I'll probably use the one that came off the Ultimate Speed affair. So I thought I'd give it a go on the K11 Micra. My K11 isn't an everyday car. Oil is changed yearly, and it's done around, blimey, about 500 miles since the last change, so hasn't exactly done a huge amount of mileage. I would recommend using an external battery if you've got one available, so that you don't run down your internal car battery. These draw about obviously 12 volts, but they can draw up to 12 volts at 5 amps, so they're not super consumptive, but they will run down a battery if you use it for a long time. I would also recommend warming up the engine oil before starting. On this occasion I didn't bother, but I would probably have much better results if I did run the engine up to temperature. The end result was just as adequate though, so it wasn't actually too bad. So I set it in front of the air conditioning condenser, just sort of balanced on the bumper, and made sure that everything was in place, made sure it was pushed down the dipstick tube. Now it was pushed down as far as it would go, and it was at the point where the oil just starts to touch the dipstick itself. Immediately on powering on, I started to see oil being sucked out of the sump, like so. You can also tell that that oil is actually still pretty good. I mean, you could arguably use that oil again in another car. I wouldn't recommend it, but it is still pretty clean. But the oil came up slowly. This was sort of the typical speed at which it was coming up. I'd say that if the engine was warm, it would be coming up a bit faster. Comes into the unit, which is generating suction using that little pump that we took apart in the previous video. And after a very short time it reaches the pump. You can see it's just about coming up now, and in it goes through the pump, and because it's being aerated you do get sort of quite a splattery output, as you can see there, but it is working. I mean, it is taking the oil out of the engine and draining it into the receptacle that I've got on standby. Now, the K11 Micra takes around 3.2 litres of oil, and I did a very rough calculation at the end of this process to determine how much oil I'd actually sort of got back into the engine. But as you can see there, it is draining away quite happily, and does seem to be doing exactly what it says on the tin, which is good, so I was quite pleased with that. Now, the previous unit, I didn't realise this until a fellow YouTuber or a person that commented on the previous video made me aware, but there's actually an inline fuse between the motor and one of the terminals, I think the positive terminal. So it's quite possible actually that the motor was not actually burnt out at all, and it was just that fuse that had blown. A little bit late now because it's obviously in the bin and it's long gone, but if you have a similar problem, it probably is worth checking that fuse first to make sure that it hasn't blown. Looking at it, because it was in a some heat shrink, you would probably need to cut the heat shrink, solder out the fuse and solder in a new fuse, which could be a little bit iffy because you would be applying heat to it or somehow sort of get a fuse in there. But yeah, I mean, that would probably account for the problems that I was indeed experiencing. One to keep in mind, and certainly one that I'll keep in mind with this particular unit. So in total, I'd say it took about 25 minutes to drain out the oil that it managed to drain out, and I kept an eye on it. But you can actually use this opportunity if you are working on your car to do a couple of other jobs, say replace the spark plugs, do the air filter, do anything else that you need to do service-wise. Now, I left this, as you can obviously tell, left it running for the duration of the time that it would take to drain out. And I then went to put oil back into it. So I had in total about just over 3.2 litres worth of fresh engine oil in my 5 litre jug of oil. And I managed to fill the engine back up with just under 2 litres, so I'd say probably about 1.9 litres worth of oil. Now, when when this unit actually stopped sucking, I put the dipstick back in just to see how much oil was actually left on the dipstick, and it was right at the bottom of the dipstick, literally sort of touching right at the bottom. So what I did was I topped it back up with 1.9 litres worth of oil. So you are getting a fair amount of oil out of the engine, but in my case it left just over a litre of oil in the engine, which on a small capacity engine like this is a fair amount of the actual capacity of oil left in the engine. So for future reference, I would probably prefer to do a proper oil change. In other words, sump plug off, oil out, new oil in. However, if you are out of real sort of pinch and you can't get the car raised up or anything like that, and you've got to change the oil, then this is a good sort of alternative or halfway house until you can actually get a proper oil change done on your vehicle. I mean, you still need, in the case of the Micra, you still need to get it up in the air to get to the oil filter. So in the case of the Micra, I would probably say it's probably just worth actually doing a proper oil change rather than sucking it out through the dipstick tube. Now, just before I took the dipstick out there, the pipe out of the dipstick tube, you could actually see that it was beginning to sort of struggle to suck up anymore. The tone of the pump actually changes, and you get to a point where it really isn't going to bring anything else out. And that's when I tested the dipstick, noticed that it was just at the bottom of the dipstick, and decided to sort of fill the engine back up. Now you can see, literally just used under 2 litres of oil. So, all in all, not bad. Pretty happy with the results. Anyway, if you found this interesting, don't forget to hit the like button, don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you again soon. Take care, thanks for watching.